Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see them? Excellent, fantastic. So I'm Dee Collins and I'm here to talk to you about cuckooing. So the information I'm going to be talking to you today was actually put together as a collaboration between Shelter Project 6 and Sheffield City Council. So to start off with, what is cuckooing? So cuckooing is a practice where people take over a person's home and use the property to facilitate exploitation. So this can include using the property to facilitate sex work. It can be using the property to deal drugs. It can be taking over the property for them to live in personally. And it can be taking over the property to financially abuse that tenant. So when we talk about cuckooing, a lot of people think cuckooing goes sort of hand in hand with county lines, but that is not always the case. So I really'd like you to think about that actually it can be just individuals who are not involved in gang activity that see the opportunity to exploit someone and use it. So a really important thing to know about cuckooing is that there's actually no definition within law. So cuckooing is the word that we use for it, but it's not actually defined legally. So that makes responding to cuckooing really quite complicated because it's not actually a crime. It's a challenge to prosecute people for cuckooing. So what tends to happen is police tend to sort of look for behaviours within that activity that they can actually use to prosecute. So sometimes you hear about it also modern slavery used to prosecute the people that were cuckooing. But actually, if the victims are not being forced into labour or if they're not being threatened, then it is a grey area, and that actually isn't, they aren't able to use modern slavery. So what are the other things that you can look for? So actually, if somebody has entered the property, you know, unlawfully, you could look at a charge for maybe burglary. And then you could also look for drug offences. So if that property has been used to, you know, store, distribute or manufacture illegal drugs, then that's another way that the police can use to prosecute. There's also assault. So if the person was assaulted on entering the property or has been assaulted while they were in the property, then that might be something that the police could look at. Also criminal damage, if the property is damaged, then they could look into that. And there's also fraud. If the occupiers are using the property for identity theft or financial fraud, then they could actually face fraud charges. And also possession of stolen property. The problem is, if there is no actual evidence that the person is being cuckooed, the person that is the victim in this situation is also quite vulnerable to being prosecuted. So it is really important that you get as much details off the person as possible. So there's also an issue with rehousing. So if somebody that has been cuckooed is then rehoused, if the actual underlying vulnerability isn't dealt with, then the people that are doing the cuckooing could follow the person to the new property. So it's about really finding ways to help that person settle into the new property. And the other complicated thing in the responding to cuckooing is actually if police start coming around more often or community workers start coming around more often, it may put the victim who is being cuckooed in further danger. So it's a really, really tricky thing to deal with. So this is the national and local prevalence. So it's estimated numbers that Changing Futures put together. So the national average, the estimation is 150 victims per 500,000 people. And in Sheffield, they found 166 people The way that they did this is because it isn't defined as a crime. There isn't records really kept around it. So they actually did internet searches looking for keywords and actually used that as a way of finding what they think the national prevalence could be. They had to be really careful though, because when you put in cuckooing in as a keyword, they got quite a lot of information on birds. So they were very, very thorough in going through that and actually taking out the ones that weren't relevant. So here are the barriers to recognition. So one of the main issues is the victim may actually not realise that they're being cuckooed. So they may not realise that they're actually being exploited. They may think that that the people that are in their property are their friends. And it may be that the victim is actually scared to report. So if they have actually been threatened, it may make it very difficult for them to come forward. So the vulnerabilities that the person actually has that made them vulnerable to cuckooing can also be a barrier for them to actually seek help. Now, there's an example of this that happened in Sheffield. So it was a man that actually had a brain injury, and he was being cuckooed. And when he actually tried to reach out for help, the people who he was reaching out to thought that he was actually having delusions because of his brain injury. So nothing was actually done. So again, that can be a really big barrier for people asking for help. And also there's the fact that when somebody is a victim of cuckooing, it can look very much like they are a perpetrator of that activity. So for people around there, it might look like they are the person, they are the leader in that situation. They might not realise that that person is actually being exploited. It can look very much like antisocial behaviour. You tend to see incidences of cuckooing in areas where there is a high crime rate anyway, and there's quite a high level of antisocial behaviour, so it can actually be hidden in plain sight. And another thing is that the neighbours actually may be scared to report it because the implications to them can be quite severe. So these are some of the vulnerabilities that can increase the risk of someone being cuckooed. So we've got a list here. So it can be things like poor mental health. It can be substance use, so that can be drugs or alcohol. It can be maybe that person has disabilities. Maybe that person is elderly or frail. That person might have care needs. Somebody that's coming out, they've been previously homeless, or they may be coming out of a hostel. Somebody that's a single parent. And then we've got issues like poverty, if people are living alone, and also social isolation. So basically, a lot of these are people that are actually, they have unmet needs. So if you think of it like that, actually, a lot of the people on this list, they have needs that aren't being fulfilled. So that might be financial needs, that might be care needs, it might be the need for their substance of choice. So it might be the need for drugs and alcohol. And this kind of unmet need makes them much more likely to open the door to somebody and let them in, because they think at first that they're going to get something from this relationship, that they will get their needs met. Another thing that you might see is that the accommodation that people are living with is just really easy to access. So it might be an accommodation that's on the ground floor. It may be close proximity to a store, to the stairwell, or it might be just that they've got a spare bedroom that they aren't using, that person has taken advantage of. There was a case in Sheffield where somebody was being cuckooed, and when the authorities looked into it, they found out that the previous occupant of that flat was actually cuckooed as well. So when the previous occupant was moved out of that flat, the gang had just come back and just cuckooed the next person that moved in, because it was so easy for them to access the property. So when you are working with people that have this list of vulnerabilities, there are a few things that you can look out for. So it might be good to look out for changes in behaviour. So that can be things like anxiety, it can be withdrawal, it can be them becoming suddenly really secretive about their living situation if you're asking them a question about it. And it can also be people becoming really defensive about their living situation. So it may be, I'm not sure if you'll be entering the property or looking at the property, but it might be that there's unexplained visitors to that property. So suddenly the footfall of that property is a lot higher than was previously witnessed. So it could be that the person is increasingly more isolated. Maybe they're not taking part in their usual activities. Maybe they're not seeing family or friends. They've suddenly kind of stopped seeing anyone and started spending a lot more time in the flat. The truth is they might be held there. And it could be that their substance abuse has changed. So it could be someone that never used drugs that suddenly has done, or someone that has had a habit, but that habit may have become worse. Also things like financial changes. So if somebody has, if suddenly somebody has more money than before, and they can't explain it, or if somebody is being exploited, it might be that they have less money. So it's these changes to look out for. And it could be that suddenly they're starting to neglect their environment or maybe neglect their personal appearance. So it might be somebody that was very well turned out before that suddenly isn't, and they can't really explain why. Oh, sorry, I skipped one there. And also there's health issues. So if suddenly somebody is having health issues that they didn't have before, maybe something that's caused by mental health, maybe they're experiencing sort of extreme stress, and you can see them having like a really obvious sort of change in weight, then that might be something to look out for. But also if somebody's coming and asking for medication, and it's quite obvious from interacting with them that they haven't been taking their medication, but yet they're asking for more, or they're asking for a higher dose, it might be that that medication is being sold, has been taken for them. So it really is about asking those questions. And the next slide is about asking those questions. So it's about professional curiosity, which was talked about earlier. Now, these are some examples of professional curiosity. So these came from Shelter. So Shelter use these with the people that they're helping that they suspect may be cuckooed. But some of them still might be relevant for you. So asking about the people, if they started mentioning people that's hanging about with them that you haven't heard of before, just asking about these people. Asking, you know, do the people stay in the flat often? You know, do they have their own house? Asking if they've given them a key, because, you know, it might not be unusual to give a friend a key, but it's quite unusual to let those friends come in and out as they please. You know, maybe asking about other people in the property. You know, do they bring people in the property that you don't know? It's really about finding out all that information and really digging. Now, I've heard people describe professional curiosity as empathetic nosiness, and I really like that expression. But it really is about asking those questions and really trying to find out what's happening for that person. And it's about, you know, doing it in a trauma-informed way and actually really helping that person feel safe. So when we talk about trauma-informed practice, we talk about safety, trustworthiness, choice, having it as a collaboration, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So really things like safety can be different for everybody, because it may be if somebody is being really heavily controlled, it may be finding a way that you can have safe communication with that person. So it might be that them having like a safe phone that they can use that the people that are occupying their property don't know about. It might be that they are actually being bugged. It has happened. Somebody that did access Shelter actually was being bugged. Every time they had a professional appointment, they'd make sure that they had a phone line in their pocket that was open, so they could listen to everything that that person was saying to the professional. So it may be about letting them actually communicate with you using writing, you know, writing down what they want and actually not being confused when that's happening. Maybe just handing them a pad and letting them do it. And also there's things like trustworthiness. Now, cuckooing is really complex, and I'm hoping I'm getting this across in this because it's not a simple thing to fix. So it's about letting that person know that you will try and help them, but actually it's not a straightforward fix that you can fix straight away, and actually giving them the choice in that, and it being a collaboration. And also really like the empowerment that comes from, you know, really acknowledging the fact that this person has come to you and has asked for help, and that might have been a really difficult thing for them to do. So really affirming that. And then the last one is really taking in people's differences, because it's very, very different for people of different backgrounds, for people of different genders, to really sort of maybe communicate with you, and it's really about kind of taking that into account. So I've another case that I've heard about was there was a man that was being cuckooed, and he was a big man, and he was an ex-bouncer, and actually because he was an ex-bouncer, people thought that he didn't have vulnerabilities, and actually they saw straight past that, but actually his vulnerabilities were in different areas. So understanding that different genders and different different pasts and different cultures could show up in different ways. So here are a few principles to take away. I know I've given you a load of information, but it is such a complex issue. So the principles to take away from this. So the victims of cuckooing or exploitation can often be seen as the cause of the problematic behaviour. So if somebody is getting complained about, it's easy to make assumptions that they're the ones behind it, but actually it's about being able to see past that and dig a bit deeper. So the victims can be both the victim, and they can also, in different ways, have their own problematic behaviour going on. So just because somebody is being exploited, it doesn't mean that they're not causing other, that they're not involved in other problematic behaviours. So cuckooing is not always the presenting need. So somebody might come to you with a need that you don't see as being cuckooing. But actually cuckooing could be the thing underneath that need. So it could be that they're presenting with very severe mental health and severe anxiety, but when you dig deeper, you find out there are things going on in their lives, and actually it's the cuckooing that is causing that. A really important thing to remember is just because someone has not reported it before or does not want to take action, it does not mean it's not happening. You know, it is a risk for people to come forward and actually take action. It can put them in more danger to begin with, and actually it's respecting that. So it's about using person-centered support. So what do they want to happen, and helping them understand their options. And again, it's using that trauma-informed approach to professional curiosity. It's asking those questions. It's really digging deeper and finding out what can you do to support them, and what barriers can you remove to make them feel safe. And as was said earlier, it's about having a multi-agency response, and communication is the key. I'll leave you with this last example. So there was a case in 2019 of cuckooing. It wasn't in Sheffield. But what happened is the agencies didn't talk to each other very well. So the police believed that this person was being cuckooed, but actually other places didn't take the records that needed to be taken around it. So when it went to court, the judge didn't believe that this gentleman was cuckooed, even though the police did, and the evidence was there, but it just wasn't strong enough to have that legal action. So it really is about being as thorough as you can be when it comes to cuckooing. It's really important. And I'd like you to say thank you for listening. I talked non-stop there because there was just so much that I wanted